introduce Catherine Parker, who is going to introduce Jimmy Roberts, and then we'll get started. Christina Teutcher will be here momentarily. She is stuck in traffic on Route 95, so we all know how bad that can be. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you turning out on such a beautiful day, and welcome to our library.
I'm very happy to see all of you here today. I'm Legislator Catherine Parker, and I am very proud to represent Mamaroneck and Larchmont, because what you are all doing, this Community Reads program, is really exceptional. And I don't think that there's another program going on in another community like this where there's so many different events and everybody's reading the same book, and I really think it's really spectacular for all of you. So let's give you a round of applause for doing Boys in Vogue. I also want to thank Sue Riley and the other committee members who have made this event possible. Mary Lee Barrage, Elaine Chapnick, John Colquitt, Paul Dougherty, Sunny Goldberg, June Hessler, Beth Radow, and head librarians Laura Eckley and Susan Riley, and librarians Lori Fridelli and Linda Bandari. Again, this is a terrific panel that you have assembled. Let me introduce you to our moderator, Jimmy Roberts. Jimmy Roberts is probably a very familiar face to all of you. He is a 13-time Emmy Award-winning broadcaster and writer, and most recently he has worked for NBC and also the Golf Channel. He is also a features reporter at the Olympic Games for NBC. Jack Nicklaus, who, as we all know, is the legendary golfer, has said this about Jimmy. Jimmy Roberts has always been a wonderful storyteller, touching the hearts and challenging the minds of viewers, and I certainly have to agree with that. I love and have been an avid fan of watching the Olympics for many years, and I find that the stories that Jimmy Roberts does, which really tells the story about how the athlete really came to be, you know, where they come from, the adversities that they faced, all the human interest pieces of that story really make that, I think, come to life. And I find that really that just shows that's Jimmy's natural curiosity about people, to really drive that story. And again, it shows very clearly that he has an understanding and an admiration for the athlete. It really comes through in those stories, and it comes through to the viewers. Before I turn the mic over to Jimmy, I also would like to say thank you for agreeing to be here. You probably saw Jimmy while you were watching the Masters tournament. For those of you that follow golf, you know how busy he is. Now, after this, he is going to be getting ready for the Summer Olympics in Rio. So thank you for your time and being here with us today. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Jimmy Roberts.
Thank you, Catherine. It's good to be here. First, let me say that when I was a kid, I grew up in White Plains, so I'm a local. Grew up in White Plains and I live in Rye. And for all but 4 years of my life, I lived in the New York area. But when I was a kid, I used to get in trouble for telling stories, and now I just get paid for it, which is a nice transition. Good for you to learn English. I have had the good fortune of having a job which is, to some, seemingly not work. And you know what they say is, if you can find a job that you love, you won't work a day in your life. And I've been that fortunate. I've covered every sporting event you can imagine. I was at ABC Sports for a while when ABC Sports existed. Then went to work for ESPN for 12 years, and I've been in NBC for the last 16 years. And as I said, covered just about everything, including the World Chess Championships, which was a very quiet affair, but a little bit different than the things that we're used to. But, you know, there really is nothing like the Olympic Games. Let me just say that the Olympics and international competition are just such a remarkable thing. I have been asked so many times in my career, maybe the one question I'm asked most frequently, most often is, what's the best event I've ever seen? What's the most memorable thing I've ever witnessed in sports? And I'm headed to my 16th Olympic Games this summer, and the most memorable thing that I can remember came from an Olympics. And it happened to have been an event that got a lot of attention, but I think it's indicative of the type of event that disappears, but for every 4 years, when it kind of rears its head and becomes the type of thing that people focus in on. And it's much like swimming, and to a certain degree, like rowing, if some kind of story presents itself. But it was back in 1994, and it involved Dan Jansen. And I'm sure that some of you will remember, but yeah, it was a speed skater, and he his saga goes way, way back. He actually skated in the 1984 Olympic Games in Sarajevo, competed there as the youngest competitor on the American team, and he was very, very promising. And by the time 1988 rolled around, he had realized that promise and had become the fastest sprint speed skater in the world, dominated the 500 meters and the 1,000. And he was favored to win both those races, and Dan comes from a big Wisconsin family. He's the youngest, I think it's a 12, something crazy like that. But on the day that he was supposed to compete in the 500 meters, he got a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning that his older sister Jane, who he was very, very close with, had died of leukemia that morning. And he was just absolutely crushed. And he figured that, you know, she would want him to compete, so he did, with a heavy heart. And many of you may remember that the story leaked out by the evening, which is when the race was. He skated, and in the third turn he fell. And the story by that time had been widely told, and after the race he said that he was going to dedicate his next race, his last race, to his sister, the 1,000 meters, which was 2 days later. And so now this story became more than just a sporting event. There were millions of people all over the world watching this race and rooting for this guy who was skating for something more than just a medal. And in the last turn, second to last turn, he fell again. And then I'll still remember and I'm sure some of you may remember the picture too. It was on the cover of Time magazine of, you know, Dan sitting on the ice with his head in his hands up against the boards. And, you know, that's really one of the more remarkable things about, I think, about the Olympics and about international competition, is that you have one moment, and it comes and it goes. If you're Derek Jeter, you get to play 162 games. You know, if you're LeBron James, you get 82 games a year. And you have many, many chances. But if you're an Olympic athlete or an international athlete, it comes and it goes, and you either grab the brass ring, and in many cases you're judged by the result, which is a shame. And I've heard many, many athletes, and maybe we can talk a little bit about this, talk about their frustration about being judged by the one moment rather than the thousands of hours that go into the training and the construction of what they're doing. You know, it's the journey, it's not the destination. Anyway, so Dan, you know, crashed in the race and had to wait 4 years. Remember, this fellow was as dominant as an athlete can be in his chosen sport. So he waited his 4 years, and the next opportunity for him was in Albertville, France, 4 years later. And Albertville was the last time that the Winter Games had speed skating outdoors. And so it was a warm day. And the advantage that the best skaters might have were blunted because the ice was puddling. And so he didn't fall, but one of those who wasn't expected to be competitive won because the conditions were just very, very unusual. So now this fella who had been on the Olympic team dating all the way back to 1984 and had had disappointments in 88 and again in 92, probably would have quit competitive speed skating but for a very, very significant decision that was made that had nothing to do with him. It was that year that the International Olympic Committee decided that instead of holding the games both summer and winter every 4 years, they would stagger them to take advantage of the sponsorship opportunities and not have the games competing, the summer games competing against the winter games. So what that meant was that the summer games, the next winter games, instead of being in 1996, would be in 1994. So he only had to wait 2 years. So he said, all right, I'll give it one more try. So he does, and he gets to Lillehammer, Norway, and in the third turn, in the 500 meters, he doesn't fall, but he loses an edge, and in a race which is defined or won and lost by hundredths of seconds, the race was lost. Much like swimming, much like rowing, you know, it doesn't really take very, very much. But it was done for him. And at this point in his career, he had really become disenchanted with the 1,000 meters because it just wasn't the race for him at this point in his life, and he didn't like competing in it. And so he told his coach, Peter Miller, after this slip, that again, everybody was watching, everybody was waiting for the result of it. He told his coach, he said, I'm done. I'm not skating in the 1,000. I just can't subject myself to this. I don't feel good about it. And his coach convinced him, you know, you should really do this. Just give it one last try. You got nothing to lose. You weren't the favorite. And so he did. And he went out, and as many of you who know the story understand, or now remember, he won the gold medal, but not before, in the second to last turn, he lost an edge. And I was in the arena at that point, and there was a gasp like I have never heard when he lost that edge. But he righted himself, he won his pairing, set a world record, won the gold medal. And I'm thinking about it right now, and the hair on the back of my head is standing up because it's really the reason why it's the most memorable thing I've ever seen in sports. Forget about, you know, the Olympics or international competition. He crosses the line, and he's in his warm down lap, cool down lap, and out from the competitors' locker room come all of the other competitors, the people who had trained for their one moment, you know, their one moment to try and make the best of all those hundreds and thousands of hours of training. And there they all are, lining the ice, applauding. And as he's skating around the ice, you could see, and it happened right in front of me, so I saw it happening. You could see people in the crowd are handing down a little baby from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, until that baby was handed over the security fence. Back then there wasn't quite the security that there is now. And handed over the fence, and Dan skated over and took the baby. It was his daughter, Jane, who had been named after his sister, who had passed away on the anniversary of this day. And so he skated around the ice, massive applause, and it was the greatest thing I have ever seen in sports. And it was in a sport that if Dan Jansen walked down the street in New York City, no one would know who he was. But I've been with Dan in countries like Norway and the Netherlands, and he's Paul McCartney. But it was a great, great moment, and it's the reason why I do have the greatest job there is. So let me introduce some of the other folks who are going to be here with us on the panel today. First of all the way to my left, is John Collins. John's a local guy. Actually, both these fellows local guys, which we love. And he is one of America's most successful swim coaches. He started coaching in 1970 in my hometown at the Rye YMCA, and then went on to take over the Badger Swim Club from his dad, right, in 1971?
Sort of.
Okay, well, we'll get to that in a minute. All right. He himself was an All-America swimmer at the University of Indiana, which is quite a pedigree. Swam for the legendary coach Doc Counsilman, and after graduating, went on to earn a law degree at Fordham. He's coached a number of world champions and Olympic medalists, including Rick Carey, Leah Lovelace, is it Maurer?
Maurer, yeah.
Maurer, Toby Smith, Jenny Thompson, and Christina Teuscher, who's going to be with us here a little bit later. From 1984 to 2007, John was a U.S. national team coach, head coach at the 1995 Pan American Games, the 1997 Pan Pacific Championships, which is a gigantic event in swimming, the 2001 World Championships team, and most recently the 2007 World Championship team in Perth, Australia. John was named Coach of the Year by American Swimming Coaches Association in 1983 and is an inductee into the Metropolitan Swimming Hall of Fame, the Westchester County Sports Hall of Fame, and he's also in the American Swimming Coaches Hall of Fame. I look forward to meeting you. I've heard your name for a long, long time, and it's great to have you with us here today. Our other panelist that's here with us today, aside from Christina, is also a local, resident of Rye. Say hello to Raul Rodriguez. He is, or was, an American rower, won a silver medal at the 1988 Olympic Games in an event called the Coxless Fours. Graduate of Tulane University, moved to Philadelphia from there to pursue his passion, which was rowing, or actually, as he told me a little while earlier, I just wanted to go to the Olympic Games and rowing seemed like the best route. So, rowed for the Penn Athletic Club in Philadelphia, which at the time was the dominant club and is still a very, very active presence. Won a silver medal at the Pan American Games in 1991, which were in Cuba. And the significance of that is that Raul is a Cuban American. Are both your parents from Cuba? Both parents born in Cuba. He's a first generation American, but Cuban American. And also, and this is pertinent to the book that we'll be talking about, or some of the things that we'll be talking about today, in 1990, won a silver medal at the Goodwill Games, which were in Seattle. So please say hello to Raul Rodriguez. And I'm going to jump out a little bit ahead of this, but I'm going to introduce Christina and tell you a little bit about her. Christina is, I guess that's right, it's a grand slam, everybody's local. She's a graduate of New Rochelle High School and a 2000 graduate of Columbia University, where she was All-America and a 4-time NCAA champion, which is really extraordinary. She won 12 Ivy League titles, set 17 team records, and received the Honda Sports Award, recognizing her as the Outstanding College Female Swimmer of the Year. She went on to win a gold medal at the Olympic Games in Atlanta in 1996 as a member of the United States 4x200 meter freestyle team. And then 4 years later, she was captain of the U.S. women's swim team and won bronze in the 200 meter individual medley at the Sydney Games. She went on to coach the women's swim team at Yale from 2010 to 2012. She has an MBA and is on the board of directors of the Collegiate Women's Sports Awards. So that's quite a resume as well. Oh, and by the way, she swam for John when she was young. Everything's connected. Anyway, so when Christina shows up here and the traffic allows, you give her a big round of applause, but we're going to get started, I think, without Christina and talk a little bit. So, one book, one community. I read this book about, I guess it was about a year ago. Somebody had told me, it's kind of like Unforgiven. It wasn't like Unforgiven, but I'm glad I read it anyway. But the thing that I think it brought to light for me, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on this, is the whole idea of team. And the whole, in rowing particularly, Raul, you can't, unless you're in that part of the discipline where it's really just one person in, what is it called, a single scull, is that what it is? And that's not what most of the events are. And you really need to be pulling together. What was your experience like in that regard as a teammate?
You know, I read the book a couple years ago, and I reread the first 100 pages or so this morning. And right at the beginning of the book, it talks about the boat. He said, there's reference to the boat, and the author says that she was confused whether the boat was the craft, or the boat was the crew, and the boat's all that, you know, in rowing. And in rowing, all you're doing all the time is trying to get the members of the crew to row as one. And it's interesting because a really good rower changes how they row to complement those around them. You know, in other words, you'll always sort of have, you might have somebody who's stronger, a little bit stronger than everybody else, and that rhythm is kind of projected on the boat. But you work all the time. And then as far as team goes, it's interesting because I remember saying, we were very lucky because we made the Olympic team very early. We qualified in May. The Olympics, our finals were until the end of September. So it felt like we were in the Olympic team for half a year. It was awesome, you know. We were Olympians, you know. And but I had been on the national team for several years at that point, And this was really the first time I really felt like we were a team. The other boats I was in, we were crews. You know, in other words, we had qualified, but it wasn't that sort of team where we felt like it was just one unit. We had a special group.
John, I've coached thousands, it has to be.
Yeah, I've coached a lot of people.
So, first of all, how young, let's just say with Christina, who is obviously an extraordinary swimmer, and Rick Carey as well, at what point did you look at these, at that time, kids, and say, they're gonna be very special, not just special, but very special?
I started training Rick when he was just around 12, almost 13 years old. And he wasn't very good when he started with us.
Always a backstroke swimmer?
No, he just, he was a interesting character because he had, at an early age, he had a drive to excel, he liked to win. He wasn't well trained, and he would just go out fast and go as hard as he could, as far as he could, and then he died. And we had to teach him, you know, how to train, and he began to not die. And the thing about Rick was he had a dislike for slow swimming, and he didn't want to train with people who were slow swimmers. And in a typical situation where you're training a swim team, you may have 24 kids or swimmers in a pool, and you may have 6 lanes or 8 lanes, so you have 4, 6 people in one lane and swimming in a circle to train, do interval sets. He was so fast that no one could swim with him. In fact, if you couldn't swim with him, couldn't keep up, he would kick you out of his lane. So he had a distaste he had a relationship with the clock that was unusual. He liked to race the clock in every day.
So you knew
He
it
was
early.
very intense. Well, he was #1 in the country when he was 12, in 100 backstroke. But swimming is a tough sport, and it's not just a few people. You can't be a big fish in a small pond. You could be the Westchester County champion, but that doesn't stack up to being, nationally ranked. Christina was someone who didn't like to swim when she was young, but came through the age group program, and came to me when I saw her swim when she was 12. In a 500 freestyle out in Long Island, and I said, this girl, she wasn't real fast, but I thought she had something that caught my eye stroke-wise, and I said, move her up to my group now. And she was someone, once again, who was very, who was afraid of my workouts.
And she's right here. I'm here.
I'm so sorry, everybody.
You know,
95 traffic is not.
Listen, I just got done telling everybody, we're all local, so we all understand the traffic on 95. No need to
Oh
explain.
my gosh, I'm sorry.
We were just talking about you.
I'm sorry.
I didn't like to swim when you were younger, but and you were afraid of my workouts.
Yes.
And then, but she did them, and she was always the last person out of the pool. And she improved rapidly, and by the time she was 14, she was a junior national champion, I think. And then by the time you were 16, you made the world championship team. You were a national champion,
Yeah.
I think, somewhere like that. But yeah, and her big moment was in 1994 when she swam in our world championship trials, and she upset the 3 fastest American swimmers, American record holders, Jenny Thompson, and a couple others, Janet Evans, and surprised everybody. Nicole Hazlett. But then went on to make the Olympic team in '96, and again in 2000. And not an easy thing to do.
No.
And the swimming trials are different than most other, I mean, it's like running, where you have to qualify only the top 2 people on that day. And that's what Jimmy was saying before, how you gotta be ready, not just, you gotta make the Olympic team first. And that's probably the most highly pressurized meet in the country or the world. It's probably tougher than the Olympics themselves.
Yeah, I was gonna say, listening to you talk makes me think of something. For the first time in 100 years, golf is gonna be in the Olympics this summer, but the format is a little unusual. It's only 60 players, and it's gonna be stroke play. So the way that they've had to limit the field is they've said that if you're in the top 15 in the world, you can have as many as 4 people from any given country. So there are in the top 15 in the world, I haven't checked in the last couple of days, but I think there are something like 6 or 7 Americans. So that basically means that the 5th ranked American, who could be 9th in the world, will not be going to the Olympic Games. And the rationale that was given reminds me of what you're saying, which is that what was said to me was, well, can you imagine being the 3rd fastest sprinter in Jamaica? You're probably the 3rd fastest sprinter in the world, but you're not going to the Olympics because they're only going to take 2. And it reminds me of that, especially in a sport which is so day specific. It's how you're doing on that day. It's swimming and it's rowing as well. But Christine, let's let everybody get some thoughts from you about, just to start out, I mean, if anybody has ever picked up a ball or, dove in a pool or, tried to do anything athletic, maybe at some point in their lives, secretly, they'll say, this is for the Olympic gold medal. But, and I should have come here prepared with this number, because I had done a speech once before. The number of people who make the Olympic team is a staggeringly small percentage of citizens in our country. It's infinitesimal. You not only made the Olympics, you were successful at the Olympics. When you look back on your Olympic career, you've done a lot. We talked about the fact that you coached in college at Yale, you got an MBA. What do you think about it? I mean, do you think about standing on that medal platform?
At the age of 5, when I was
No.
saying-
What do you think back now? When you think back now?
I think it's really funny. When you're in that role and you're moving, you're so hungry to get there that you're constantly looking at where you need to improve, and nothing is ever good enough. John always made a point to say he never wanted us to plateau, so he has a very sarcastic character, which sometimes I'm a very sensitive. I have Latino blood. I am sensitive. It didn't mesh sometimes, but it was always to keep me on edge, and I think it was one of those things that I was always hungry, and even when I finished, I spent a lot of time, and it was hard to just let go and say, I didn't accomplish this, this, and this, and this. And now, at an older age, when I have a daughter, and things aren't in the same place on my body where they used to be, I'm so proud of it. And I recognize it more and more, because also when you're in that world, you are surrounded by Olympians, you're surrounded by excellence. So it's a contagious environment to be in, and it's wonderful. Once you leave it, I think you realize it a little bit more and you get to enjoy it.
What's the moment that you look back on? Pick one.
So the moment I look back on, I have to say it was probably winning my first national title. I was 16 years old. The announcer didn't even pronounce my name correctly. And I remember leaning down on the block. This was national, so, Janet Evans is in your heat, which Janet Evans is an institution in this country, not only in swimming, in my opinion. People know who she is, but she won 4 Olympic gold medals, 1 silver. She was the reigning distance queen, had multiple world records. And I'm racing against her, and I'm in the center lane. And the guy, the official said, take your mark. And I remember laughing to myself, going, this is hilarious. I'm seated first here. And just diving in and racing. And I think sometimes we forget that. I think I had a lot of pressured situations, obviously, along the way with...
Including that one?
That's my daughter. Nothing compares to giving birth. I'm totally humbled.
So untold.
Yes. So that was one of those pure moments that I wish I could have translated in the Olympics. I think the Olympics, I was just trying to balance with the pressure and enjoy it as much as I could, but I think the pressure got to me in some of my individual events. But that race for me was one of those pure moments of just letting go and letting myself race and leaving my brain on the side of the pool, so.
That can work.
Bro, let me ask you something. This is one of my favorite questions to ask, and Christine, I'll also like your answer on this. You won an Olympic silver medal. What'd you do with the medal? Where is it?
It's in a drawer at home. It's in a drawer at
In the
home.
sock drawer,
We actually have a proper trophy case. Not trophy, but just really medals. But it's not in there. It's just in the drawer.
just in,
Yeah, I mean, we have I have a lot of other medals, and all my kids have medals in there. But yeah.
So it's in there with like the screwdriver and the Scotch tape and the.
An Olympic medal comes in quite a beautiful. The best thing, first of all, the best thing about winning the Olympic medal is you get this, kind of, probably 3-4 months after the Olympics, you get an envelope from Switzerland that showed that I wasn't expecting, and.
was there money in it?
No, it's better. There's a little bitty pin that has, and if you win a gold medal, it's gold. If it was a silver medal, it's silver and bronze. And it just has the Olympic rings on it. And I mean, so every year in New York City, I'm very fortunate because there's a huge rowing community here. And so there are a couple of events, and being able to put that on your lapel is awesome. So,
And where's the pin?
next to the medal.
Okay.
The medal comes in a very beautiful case. It's a very, like a felt case, so it's just in there.
I actually brought mine to show you guys.
Nice.
Yeah, so mine's in a drawer too. So just to give you guys an idea, each country that hosts the Olympics gets to decide on the box. This was the one from the Centennial Games, Atlanta. So they designed the box, and just to give you an idea, from Sydney, this was the Sydney box. So
awesome.
pretty different.
New age.
Yeah, and then the medals all have pretty much the same thing on them. They have Olympia, the goddess. They have the games, they have the Olympic rings. The Roman Colosseum is what it looks like, but there's a chariot. So I met a student at an event and they were explaining it to me better. They knew the medals better than I did, but it's the Colosseum, which doesn't make sense because, right, the Olympics started in Greece.
Right.
And then on the back of the medals, you'll typically see where these Olympic Games were held, and then somewhere around it'll be engraved what event. So on these medals, it was engraved here on the edge. So it's the women's 4x200 free relay. So I'm happy for people to see them on or after. Do you want me to?
Yeah, no, listen, I'm just curious. How many people in this room have ever seen a gold medal before in person? I thought so. Maybe one or two. You've seen one? Okay.
Larchmont Library had one present last week.
What's that?
Larchmont Library had one at a talk.
It wasn't real. Okay, so, let me just grab this for 1 second.
John, I'm watching Christina, and I'm just curious, as her coach, that medal is a result, to a large degree, of what he helped you to do. How do you feel when you see that medal?
Well, the stories behind everything. And,
Tell them all.
You can't tell them all. The story behind the gold medal, she qualified individually in the 200 free and the 400 free in Atlanta and made the relay. And I wasn't a coach of the team, but I was there, of course, and I was, we sweated it out. And she didn't have she was a finalist in the 200, but didn't win a medal. Finalist in the 400, didn't win a medal. And then we were left with the relay.
Tell what matters.
But no pressure from the coach.
And that's what you want to. I mean, the Olympics and being in this country is an entirely different experience as well. And back in '84 and then '96, America treats the Olympics like no other country. But anyway, so we were in Atlanta, and I couldn't get on the pool deck. But we did, talk, and it came down to that last relay where they qualified. I can't remember whether you qualified first. I think you must have.
We were qualified first, but the Germans were expected to win because they had Franziska Bauer-Almsick, who is the world record holder. on the relay, and then they had the top 800 freestyle.
The way these things work is the coaches on the Olympic, team, not that they're people's personal coaches, but they do know most of the people fairly well. There is some leeway as to who they put on the relay. So, and that's a whole different discussion that we could have about that. But Christina was left on the relay, and even though she didn't have great individual swims, and luckily they did lead her on because she had the fastest split and broke the relay wide open, gave the Americans the lead, which they didn't relinquish, and they broke the world record and Olympic record, and they won. And obviously swimming is always an individual, looked upon it more as an individual sport, and relays are great opportunities, but most of the time the people on the Olympic relays don't swim together except at the Olympics. So it was a great win, and we were very happy. It made the Olympics a great experience for her and for us as well. And I'll tell you, I have an Olympic medal here too.
Let's see.
And well, this is the box.
I can see that.
1984, to get back to Rick Carey, who's not here, who should have been here. He was once again, the Olympics were in America first time in many years.
Well, it would have been 48.
No?
Well, 80 was the Winter Games were in Lake Placid, but the Summer Games hadn't been here.
Well, the Summer Games is the games. But,
Since 1932.
right. So Rick made the Olympic team in 1980, and the team was Jimmy Carter came over and shook everybody's hand and said, "We're not going," and that was a great tragedy and a big mistake. But 1984 came around, and everybody was waving the American flag, and Rick was the best backstroker in the world by far at that point. And he was, and once again, I wasn't named I wasn't an Olympic coach. In those days, they kind of told people like me, who was a personal coach, to stay away. So we didn't have much contact with Rick the 3 weeks leading up to the games. And so it was in Los Angeles. I was on the top row of the stands watching the race. 200 backstroke, which he wanted to break the world record, broke the Olympic record in the morning, and he didn't swim quite as fast at night, and he didn't look like the Rick Carey that I knew. But he won, and he was not happy with the fact that he didn't swim fast, and the press picked up on that. He didn't wave and didn't smile too much, and they tore him apart. Came back, won the 100 back, won the relay, and anyway, to make a long story short, he had 3 gold medals. He gave one to his parents, and he gave one to me, and he kept one for himself. So that's the...
All right, I'm going to forgive him for not being here. Wow.
Anyway,
That's really something.
keep that in my closet somewhere.
Yeah, so where do you keep it in your closet?
Actually, their Olympic gold medals are worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
Not that they're made of gold.
They're not though, unless they belong to someone.
Well, I had a swimmer that I knew from the old days, a guy named Ford Kono, Olympic gold medal winner in 1952 in Helsinki. He was called Mr. Great Freestyler, Hawaiian. And about 3 years ago, I put his Olympic medals up for auction. They needed money. So they sold for like $19,000.
That's it.
Yeah.
But was it gold? Because I understand it's silver with a gold.
It's a gold overlay, I'm sure, yeah.
It's actually chocolate.
I know, I tasted it.
No.
He saw it when she.
And he thought it was-
Yeah, he thought it was wrong.
This is pretty amazing.
But they're typically, I think up until the Mexican Games, which were, sorry.
68.
Which were in '68, I think they were almost 100% gold, but they were wearing away.
Ah.
So what they started to do was make them silver or mixture with silver, and then these are gold plated. And this is real bronze. And the silver is real silver or silver plated. But it depends by Olympics, because I noticed then the Olympics after, there was some had like a crystal or glass in center and gold rim, so.
Are you guys still close to your team, you close to your teammates?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I have something to say though that I think is kind of interesting. I was in Atlanta to watch the swimming because we were living, so I rowed until 1992 and then I got married in short order. We moved to, I started working, we moved to London, and all of a sudden it's about 3 months before the Olympics, 2 months before the Olympics, my dad says, yeah, let's go to, he said, can you call the FISA, which is the U.S. rowing, or the international rowing bodies, that you get tickets to rowing in Atlanta. And so now all of a sudden we're just scrambling to get tickets and stuff, but we used to go to Centennial Park, and that's where all the ticket scalpers were until the bomb went off. And we would scalp for tickets, but swimming tickets were you could get them, you know, so we went to swimming like 4 nights in a row. So, yeah, it's really cool. So I was there, and my twins are in college now, we're newborn. So,
And I was there too, so 3 of us.
Is that
were there. How about you?
I was there.
There you go. Everybody from Westchester, everybody in Atlanta.
and yeah, you said something else earlier that, you know, and I was thinking, how would I answer that question about a moment?
Mhm.
And the moment for me is definitely 1987, because I was a very widely recruited football player, but I was a bust as a college football player, and that's why I was like, I gotta do something else, you know, before I just started going to work and stuff. I was like, I wanna go to the Olympics, and I rowed in high school, I was like, I wanna row, you know, so it was a pretty simple decision. But now it's 1987, and I'd moved my way up to top of the U.S. rowing. So we're at the, we won this race at the Nationals, so now we were in Lucerne. There's a beautiful regatta every year in this really small lake called Rothsee, about 3 miles outside of Lucerne. And back then, and actually, you know, I'm like the one guy in the world who, I think that the end of the Cold War was just terrible for not being able to hate, like, you know, the East Germans. You know what I mean? I'm kidding, but East Germany was just such a fierce power in rowing. They literally won everything. And so now it's my first, I had been on the national team the year before, but it was in a little bit in over my head. And now I'm seasoned, I'm ready to, we're good. We're racing the heat, the East Germans were right next to each other. And I remember peeking out of the boat at the 1,000, which is the halfway point. And we're like, we got like a bow, but we got a little bit of a lead on the East Germans. And I remember thinking, how great is this? You know, like, I mean, like, you know, been reading about East Germans since I was a kid, and now we're head to head, you know, and that was the best, that crew that they had was best in the world, and that was really special.
Wait,
I'm sorry.
so
They
who won?
won that.
Okay, I was gonna
So
say.
that lapse of concentration, I think.
There you go. You shouldn't have won.
Exactly. No, they were very, very good.
Let's talk a little bit about the book. So I'm curious, have we all read it?
More or less.
More or less, okay. Okay. So I'm curious to know, and I'll start this because I read it, and I love the book. I thought it was great. The one thing that I didn't like about it, as an avid reader and as someone who's written a book, is that on page 1, I knew what happened, you know, and so that kind of ruined it for me, a little bit. I would have been great if I didn't know, if the whole time I was thinking, are they going to win the race? Well, yeah, they won the race, we know that. But I just thought it was such a wonderful character study. I thought the best part about the book, just me personally, was I thought it was such a great window into the desire that makes, you know, what forms an athlete, not even an athlete, what forms somebody, the forces that form somebody to be determined. You know, and you often, and you as a coach, I'd imagine you might wonder sometimes, what's the best thing that I can do to help somebody realize their potential?
There's a couple of different things. You know, I read the book, okay, as a rower, you know, as someone who's had a great experience in rowing, like the protagonist had, you know, rowing, you know, the Olympics have changed a lot, rowing's changed a lot, everything evolves. Just to put things in perspective, and the group that I worked with, we trained with a lot of quality as opposed to quantity. In other words, rowing is an interesting sport. I know you've probably all been to the gym and seen that machine and say, okay, well, I'm gonna sit on it for 2 minutes, see how hard I can pull, and you find out, oh my God, you know, like it's unbelievable. You know, and I was a swimmer too. It's total. And my children are were in our swimmers still, and I don't know what it is. I think it's because of the leverage that you have in rowing, that the load is so heavy that it's just so easy to go anaerobic in rowing, as opposed to in swimming. It's almost like you're sprinting all the time. And so anyway, so what I say is we didn't do as much sort of less intensity, long mileage rows, and we rode every year for 7 years. I rode more in a year than he rode in his career.
Wow.
So that just put things in perspective, okay? Like, that's how much more intense, and like I said, and the guys nowadays who are, so there's some people who are in camp where they do a lot less intense work and more mileage, they're probably doing 150% of what he did in his entire career in a year. So that just kind of put things in perspective. So on the rowing side, the thing that I thought was unbelievable about the book is how callous society was 80 years ago. Like, I can't even believe it. And like I said, I started reading it again this morning, and just like what an unbelievably bad person his stepmother was. I just can't even believe how selfish can one person possibly be. And then I'm thinking, like, is she weird? Like, is she like the only person in society like that? She was like the one bad person out there, and everybody else was like people are nowadays? I mean, probably not.
Right.
You know, probably society was just that brutal, and you know, so that's one takeaway.
I think for me, it's the interpersonal, the relationship with his father, the abandonment, and I mean, with the stepmother. That part for me was unbelievable, but I do have to say, looking at it in the sporting world, there seems to be a high correlation between the truly exceptional and this exceptional, and some type of loss in parental guidance or something.
Careful, your parents are here.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I'm looking at, I'm not talking about you guys, I'm actually looking at the truly exceptional, I'm not putting myself in that.
Not the
Again,
not
it
the
comes out
slackers
where
who
you
only
look
win
at
one
the
gold
people
medal.
who, yeah, but you know what I mean? Like you see that a lot, you see that story a lot, that hunger of, you know, not finding something at home, and it helps almost create a focus of trying to find and a place for yourself in something else. So what also struck me is his demeanor, the forgiveness with his father, and just in general, and his ability to get close to people who I would think of almost as a sense of betrayal. That was remarkable, and how that actually ultimately led to him being able to trust in his team and become an exceptional player. Sorry.
Shit's right.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Well, you know, the book is indicative of, you know, if they didn't win a gold medal, they had been no book,
Right.
but they would have gone through the same travails and struggles and had the same circumstances. And, you know, and it's, and everyone here and, you know, we've had experiences that have been difficult to overcome and people that have been difficult to deal with. And I could even throw out, you know, the name that everybody knows is, you could say, look at Michael Phelps and say, you know, now, you know, somebody who grew up, whose dad walked out on him and the family, but he had one guy who believed in him, who was his coach, and still is his coach. And now he's 30 years old, and he's, and believe me, and I saw him this weekend, the past couple of days, you know, he's a much kinder, gentler Michael Phelps than he was a few years ago. He's gonna be a dad.
He's also older.
He's older, he's gone through a whole bunch of things, but he was a difficult kid to deal with.
Right.
But, and the success he had to deal with was, you know, it's obviously monumental. But, and believe me, he's pretty much as good as he always was. And he should be a tough person to, I think he'd probably win another gold medal this summer. If not on a relay, possibly in the 100 butterfly. The rest of the world has kind of caught up a little bit with him too. He's not head and shoulders above everybody. He's just barely, maybe just a little bit in some of the events. But, you know, Christina had some difficulties, and she had great parents that made things, and I had a good relationship with her parents. Rick's parents, unusual people, and I had a great relationship with them as well. But he had, he had a tough upbringing, and he had a hole. A lot of people who win, trying to,
To your point.
they're trying to live up to someone's expectations, or somebody who I'm better than they are, and I'm going to prove it. As a coach, you can't instill those things in the people you work with. You can train them. You can put them in environments that are going to, make them better. You can surround them with the right people. But ultimately, and the difference between, I can use the reference of I used to work with a rock and roll guy, and he could play music as good as anybody, but he couldn't get a record deal. And there's a lot of people who train really hard, who have great talent, who have and who want to win, but the circumstances don't quite match up, don't get put in the right environment, don't have the right contacts, and for one reason or another, they just don't quite, you don't hear about them. Yeah, but most people who are really successful always have a story, and they always have to overcome things, and they're always trying to live up to people's expectations. They may not be the healthiest people in the world in terms of what drives them, and at the end, after, as she said, after you win, maybe you don't really appreciate it quite as much because maybe you've been brought up in a culture where you gotta, well, what's next? You gotta win again, or you gotta win 8 gold medals. America demands, you break Mark Spitz's, you gotta win more than 7, you gotta win 8 to be, recognized as the best. And, so now what? What's the next step?
In rowing, and I can't speak to other sports, in rowing it's almost unheard of to have a college age athlete row in the Olympics. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I'm just saying it's rare. And when I was 25, and probably the median age for rowers in the Olympics is probably 27. Because it just takes that long to build up there. It's almost virtually impossible to have a big enough or strong enough core and big enough aerobic base to be able to do it. I mean, you're just not physically capable of doing it. It's really difficult to, again, Joe the protagonist had all he had to do was make his college, think about how he made the Olympic team. He made his college freshman 8. In the beginning of the book, the author's talking about how the head coach is all excited about the freshmen. There's not a head coach in the world who's excited about the freshmen. I can guarantee you that. They're all, they're worried about his varsity. And so he makes the freshman boat, which becomes the varsity in 3 years, and boom, he's on the Olympic. All of a sudden he's on the Olympic team. But what I'm saying is, had it been like it is now, where he'd probably be looking at 4 more years. What's he going to do for 4 years? How is he going to support himself for 4 years? He's out of the umbrella of the University of Washington. Now he's out on his own, rowing, for Lake Washington Rowing Club, and so it's without a support. My point is that you don't have to have necessarily loving parents. My parents were awesome, but you have to have supportive parents in rowing now if you're gonna write that book. It's not happening the way it happened for him.
Well, a couple of observations. Number one, if back then was now, social services would have stepped in and he wouldn't have been living in the cabin by himself. That's number one. So from my perspective, never having been an elite athlete, but having been around a lot of them, the thing that strikes me is, and I hear you talk about, there needs to be something that has happened in your life or in your personality which makes you different than other people. Perhaps you remember the golfer John Daly, won the British Open and he won the PGA Championship and was a phenomenon for a long time. He's still out there, he's playing in the senior tour now. But for a while, 25 years ago, he was a pretty big character in the world of sports. And in 1991, I still think that he was responsible for probably the second biggest upset in the history of sports after, the Americans beating the Soviets in 1980 in the hockey game. But he was the ninth alternate for the PGA Championship and was told the day before that, you know, he might have a spot in the field. So he drove all night and got there, and at the last minute ended up getting into the field, and he won. This guy was from nowhere. The field is 155 people. He was 164th, drove all night, waited around the first tee, you're in. That never ever happens. He won. My point is that I think that when people have success, athletes have success, musicians maybe, I think it takes a rare individual to be the type of person who can deal with the type of outsized success that comes with one of these things. The amount of attention, what's the craziest thing after you won that happened to you? Did something come to mind? I'm just curious. Were you at a television show? Did you meet somebody? Did you go to the White House?
I would say maybe up to the run-up, crazy mail, some guy who'd read about me that was creepy and showed up at our house. No. And then actually MTV was starting their reality series and they wanted to follow me around in the year lead up to the Olympics, and I was like, that's crazy, no way. I'm so grateful for that, to be able to say no. But yeah, I'd say that, and then meeting people like Demi Moore when she was still with Bruce Willis. We were there at the Olympics meeting Bill and Hillary Clinton with Chelsea. Chelsea had a crush on Gary Hall at the time. And so she was at, every day she wanted to go to swimming, so her parents would go with her.
How'd you get the tickets?
So they had a whole area to themselves. So meeting them and talking to the president about our shoe size, he told me I had really big feet. And I was like, what does that mean? And I mean, and then talking to him about vitamins, it was just a lot of surreal instances where you're thinking, you know, this is bizarre, yeah.
Yeah, so the point is that fame is a crazy, crazy thing. And I think that if you're not built for it, just like you're built to be a good athlete, you know, or you develop into a good athlete, I think it can be ruinous.
One of the other lessons, it's dealing with failure. And I feel like you have more failure than you have like positive, so you get used to it, I think. And then it's perspective too. I appreciated John as a coach because he always said you had to have something else besides swimming to balance, if not you were gonna go crazy. And I think that was true. Sometimes it was going to school and then just seeing in the grand scheme of things, this is just one part of my life. But you learn so much from those failures. And you also learn that it doesn't break you, and you know, all those cliches, it really is true. I actually worry about kids today that there's so much buffering and not letting them fail and getting into such a, Carol Dweck, she was a professor at Columbia when I was there, but now she's at Stanford. She has a book called Mindset, and it's absolutely true that the fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and having a fixed mindset, you think you have a finite amount of ability, and so you try to, you know, protect yourself and not fail at any point, because then people will see your vulnerabilities. I don't think it's a conscious thought, but sometimes that's how, you know, we're raised or we're conditioned, you know, in terms of how we're praised and told you're wonderful, you're perfect, you're doing great, and when it doesn't go great, what happens? And versus the growth mindset, where it's as much as I try harder, that's how much better I'm gonna get.
I can add to that.
Yes.
Some of the research shows that the most successful people are the people who have resilience. You're knocked down, you can get up and go again, and keep doing that. And resilience is a trait that no one knows quite where it comes from, but
Grit, I've heard it described as grit, and now they're trying to teach kids that in school, so I think,
Grit,
right?
Grit 101.
They should start.
Grit 101. Listen, we've run out of time. I want to thank everybody for coming, but most of all, I want to thank John. This was supposed to be about the boys and boat, but it was about a lot more than